Okay, today we're going to review the distributive property. Okay, the distributive property is when you have groupings with the parentheses, and you're going to distribute whatever's on the outside to whatever's on the inside. So in this case, x and y are both on the inside of the parentheses, so I would distribute this to this and this to this. If I do a times x, it will equal ax. If I do a times y, I get positive ay. This is the distributive property. Okay, let's do some numeric answers, and then you will probably remember this from pre-algebra or 8th grade algebra. Okay, for example 1, I use EX for example. There's a number outside the parentheses, and it's being multiplied by the parentheses. So to simplify it, I want to get rid of the parentheses. So I take the 5 and I multiply it by the first term in the parentheses. So 5 times 2x is 10x. Okay, and then I'm going to take the 5 and multiply it by the other term in the parentheses. So 5 times positive 7 is positive 35. And then 10x plus 35 is my final answer since those are not like terms. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and try the next one. This one also has a number on the outside being multiplied by parentheses. So I'm going to simplify it by distributing and getting rid of the parentheses. 8 times 3x, 8 times 3 is 24. Now I'm going to keep the x on it. Okay, since there's a minus sign, I'm going to bring down the minus sign. Okay, and then the 8 times the 5 is 40. 24x minus 40 is my final answer. It's simplified because there's no parentheses on it anymore. Okay, for example 3, it's 6 times quantity x minus 5. So to simplify, I'm going to distribute the 6 to both terms inside the parentheses. So 6 times x, well, that's just 6x. There's a minus sign, so I'll go ahead and bring down the minus sign. 6 times 5 is 30. 6x minus 30 is my final answer. Now for example 4, it's the same idea, but just to mix it up a little bit, I gave you 3 terms inside the parentheses. Okay, so this is 3 times this whole big parentheses. So I just have to make sure I multiply it by everything that is in the parentheses. So 3 times 2m is going to be 6m, and I'm going to make sure I keep the m on that. Okay, I'm going to bring down the minus sign, and then 3 times n is 3n. Okay, I'm going to bring down the plus sign for the next one, and then 3 times 7p is 3 times 7 is 21, and then I am going to make sure I keep the p. That's my final answer. None of these are like terms since they all have a different variable on them. Okay, go ahead and copy the next examples about negatives. I am going to still use the distributive property, but once I have a negative that I am distributing, it makes it a little bit trickier. Okay, hopefully you've copied the problem. Okay, for example 5, there's a negative 4 on the outside. So when I do negative 4 times 7, I'm actually going to get negative 28. Now I'm going to keep the x on it. Okay, now it gets trickier for the next one because this looks like a positive 2. So I want to bring down the plus sign. But once I do a negative 4 times 2, it turns to minus 8. So this is the answer I'm going to put. Now some of you learned in middle school to write negative 28x plus negative 8. That's also a correct answer, and I will take it either way. Okay, let's go ahead and try the next one. Again, there's a negative 7 on the outside, so I have to be really careful with that. If I do negative 7 times 2, that's negative 7 times 2 is 14. I'm going to go ahead and keep the x there. Okay, now this looks like it should be a minus 4y, but if I do a minus 7 times a minus 4, a minus times a minus cancel to a plus. So it is going to be a plus sign. 7 times 4 is 28, and I want to keep the variable. This is my final answer. Okay, a couple more negatives to practice. Okay, this has a negative 3 on the outside, so I know I have to be really careful with my signs. If I do negative 3 times negative 11, negative times negative is going to give me a positive. 3 times 11 is 33, and I will keep the m. Okay, this is a negative 3 and a positive 4. A negative times a positive, I keep a negative. 3 times 4 is 12, and I will keep the variable p. Okay, one more term, because there's 3 terms in the parentheses. Okay, I have a negative 3 times a minus n. Okay, a minus 3 times a minus n, a minus times a minus cancels to a plus sign. And then 3 times n, just 3n. Okay, one more tricky negative one. Okay, on this one, there's no number, it just has a negative on the outside. If you know how to distribute the negative from this step, you're welcome to do so. Okay, some people like to imagine that if there's a negative sign, there's always imaginary 1 here. So I'm really doing negative 1 times 5, which is negative 5x. And then if I do negative 1 times negative 7, negative times negative will make it a positive. 1 times 7 is 7, and then I'm going to keep the y. And then that's my final answer. And if you just distribute the negative from the first step, as long as we have the same final answer, you're fine. Okay, the last distributing examples are going to have fractions because I know you guys always love fractions. Now, some of you are very comfortable with fractions, and if you are very comfortable with fractions, you can go ahead and simplify this in your head, write your answer. That's fine with me. I'm going to show an extra step because sometimes the extra steps helps people make sure they get the answer exactly correct. Okay, let's see. I want to do 1/3 times 6x. Okay, now if you're okay with 1/3 of 6x, you can write the answer. Some people get a little confused because there's a numerator and a denominator on the 1/3, but the 6x does not have a numerator and denominator. If I would like it to, I can put a 1 at the bottom, and now they're both fractions. Now when you multiply fractions, you multiply the numerators and you multiply the denominators. So if I want to do 1/3 times 6x, I first do 1 times 6x, which is 6x, and then I multiply the denominator. So 3 times 1 is 3. Yes, it looks crazy, but when we get used to it, it'll be okay. Okay, now I'm going to go to the next one, 1/3 times 9y. Again, if you want, put a little 1 at the bottom. It helps me keep track. So if I'm going to multiply the numerators first. 1 times 9 is 9. I'm going to put a y here. And then 3 times 1 is 3. Okay, one more. Again, I like to put a little denominator. You don't have to. So if I'm doing 1/3 times 15, if I multiply the top numbers, 1 times 15 is 15. On the bottom numbers, 3 times 1 is 3. Okay, this answer doesn't look the best, but it's okay. Now, if I can simplify these fractions, I'm going to. I can make them nicer. Now, if I look at the first fraction, 6x divided by 3, well, 6 divided by 3 is just 2. So this is just 2x minus, if I do 9 divided by 3, I get 3. So 9y divided by 3 is 3y. And then for the last one, 15 divided by 3 is just 5. So fractions are just dividing. And if we can divide it, we can get rid of the fractions. Okay, let's go to the next one and try it again. Okay, I'm going to do 3/4 times 8x. If you're comfortable multiplying those in your head based on what you learned before, go ahead and do that and then write your answer. I'm going to show an extra step for people who like to be extra careful with their fractions. Okay, since 3/4 is a fraction and 8x is not, I'm going to put a 1 here. That way I can keep track of the top and bottom. Okay, if I multiply the numerators, the top numbers, 3 times 8x is 24x. Okay, now I'm going to multiply the bottom numbers. The 4 times the 1 is 4. Okay, I'll go to the next one. See, it's all positive, so positive. If I do the top numbers, let me put this over 1. 3 times 12 is 36y. And if I multiply the bottom numbers, 4 times 1 is 4. Okay, now there's nothing wrong with fractions, and I could leave them as fractions unless they can simplify. So if I do 24 divided by 4, that's 6. So 24x divided by 4 is 6x. Keep your variable. And then 36y divided by 4 is 9y. So this is my final answer, and it's as simplified as I can do. And if your work's different, but you know what you're doing, carry on. Okay, one last example with fractions. Okay, let's see, 2/5 times 3x. Again, if you want to do that in your head, that's fine. I'm going to put a little 1 because it's a fraction with a non-fraction. Now if I do this times 2 times 3x is 6x, and then 5 times 1 is 5. Okay, I'm going to bring down the minus. Let's go, the next one's already a fraction, so let me multiply the top. 2 times 1 is 2, and then 5 times 7 is 35. Now 6 divided by 5, that doesn't divide evenly. 2 divided by 35, that also doesn't divide evenly, so I'm going to leave it as a fraction. And even though you might not like the way this looks, this is my final answer.